Over the years, SpongeBob SquarePants has produced many science fiction episodes. But as the show went on, they seemed to forget what makes a science fiction narrative actually work. Let's take a look at 8 science fiction SpongeBob episodes from classic SpongeBob to middle SpongeBob to modern SpongeBob and ask ourselves, what does it take to craft a meaningful science fiction narrative? Chapter 1. SB-129. SB-129 is a science fiction episode that deals with the concept of time travel. The episode is a subversion of the Back to the Future trope, where even though Squidward gets stuck 2,000 years in the future, the only thing he cares about is getting away from other versions of SpongeBob and Patrick, rather than getting back to his own time. At its core, the episode is simply about a guy who wants to get away from people he dislikes and learns that it's better to be around people, even if they annoy you, than to be alone. The science fiction elements of the episode make the places that Squidward goes to escape from SpongeBob and Patrick more interesting than if he was just hiding from them. Another writing benefit the science fiction elements provide is how they can push the other versions of SpongeBob and Patrick to the extreme to further illustrate that these are far more annoying versions than their present-day counterparts. SpongeBob has clones for every letter of the alphabet, which now contains hundreds of letters, and Patrick has 2 heads. And when Squidward uses the future's time machine to go to the past, he encounters primitive and dangerous versions of his neighbors. These extremes could only be accomplished if we push past current logical reality into science fiction, but still represent the actual story of the episode, which is Squidward wants to get away from these 2 guys. Science fiction writing also plays a role in the episode's climax, where, after Squidward ran away from both the future and the past, he finds himself nowhere at all after messing with the time machine. The surreal sequence of the time machine crashing out is contrasted by the white nothingness that Squidward finds himself in next. This void of white is what finally teaches Squidward the lesson of the episode about rejecting loneliness before he returns home. The episode also plays with the concept of time travel by revealing that Squidward actually invented the concept of jellyfishing, which is ironic considering that was the very thing he was trying to get away from doing with Sponge and Pat. While in the past, he tries to distract primitive SpongeBob and Patrick by teaching them jellyfishing, unknowingly creating the concept in some kind of time loop. This both plays with the concept of time travel and subtly conveys to the audience Squidward's more childish side that he actively represses in most episodes. What makes SB-129 succeed so well as a narrative is how it uses the cool science fiction concepts like the chrome future, the time machine, the vibrant past, and the nothingness to all fit together to tell a relatable story. Even though the events of the episode are larger than life and something no one has ever experienced, because we relate to Squidward throughout this journey, we feel like we are on it with him. Chapter 2. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3 is the episode that introduces Manray. There were 2 Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes before this one, both of which had science fiction elements, but I wanted to focus on this episode because it focuses on the concept of a supervillain. One of the most prominent science fiction concepts in media is that of the supervillain, a person with dubious morals who is imbued with powers beyond our understanding and control. The reason the concept of a supervillain resonates with us is because we are naturally afraid of those who have disproportionate power and use it over others. But in real life, power can be complicated and difficult to convey. So by using something easier to grasp, like a bad guy with a laser beam, the story can more easily explore the concept of morality. The episode revolves around the character arc of Manray, who, after being accidentally freed by SpongeBob and Patrick while they're house-sitting the Mermaid, pretends to be a changed man so they will let him go. SpongeBob is able to take some power over Manray in this situation by using Mermaid Man's tickle belt, which stops Manray in his tracks if he ever tries to do something evil. This raises the stakes of Manray's original plan, and forces him to play the part even more of someone trying to be good. The episode uses a mix of science fiction elements and good comedy to pose its central question about morality and what it means to be good or evil. Throughout the episode, there are instances where Manray just acts good to get out of trouble, and in these instances, he's punished either by the tickle belt or by Patrick's stupidity. But there are 2 times in this episode where Manray is genuine. The first is when he says please when asking for the tickle belt to be taken off, which SpongeBob then rewards him by taking off the belt. And the second is when he decides to not rob the bank and instead make an account and get checks with little poodles on them. showing his full transition into polite society. Even beyond the science fiction elements like the tickle belt, orb of confusion, and laser hand, the narrative still communicates the virtues of being good for the sake of being good, and that is an excellent use of science fiction in a narrative. Chapter 3. The Algae is Always Greener. The Algae is Always Greener is a walk a mile in my shoes kind of story that revolves around Plankton taking the place of Mr. Krabs. This episode benefits from its main science fiction element, the switch lives just to see what it's like machine Plankton built last Tuesday, because it allows Plankton to literally switch lives with Mr. Krabs to see what it's like. If a plot like this were present in a universe where such a machine couldn't exist, it could still be accomplished, usually by the two characters just agreeing to do some stuff the other does on a daily basis. But when you break away from reality in the way that science fiction is capable of doing, you can convey a more one-to-one version of the lesson by having one character literally take the place of another. By taking Mr. Krabs' place, the episode explores Plankton's desire for Krabs' success and also shows us why Plankton himself doesn't have that success, as the responsibility of being Mr. Krabs is something that Plankton just can't handle, as his decisions consistently turn other characters against him. The episode culminates in showing Plankton the worst thing that Mr. Krabs has to deal with, which is, well, himself. The thing that causes Plankton's breaking point is having to deal with his own Plankton, which in this universe is Krabs trying to steal the secret formula. After dealing with all of these shenanigans, Plankton decides that all of the success and even the thing he claims to want the most, the Krabby Patty secret formula, aren't worth it if he has to live as Mr. Krabs, and chooses to head back to his old life with newfound appreciation. Chapter 4. SpongeHenge. SpongeHenge is SpongeBob's take on a natural disaster sort of science fiction story. The defining element of this episode are these strong winds that are just sort of there. There's no explanation for why the winds are here, they just are. Beyond the minor inconveniences that constant strong winds would create, SpongeBob is particularly affected by the wind since it goes through his holes and creates this music that attracts jellyfish. The episode succeeds at creating this eerie feeling of impending doom, which makes the ending of the episode really strong when SpongeBob creates a bunch of stone carvings of himself to satiate the jellyfish, which the creatures of thousands of years later don't know the original reason for the existence of, much like the real-life Stonehenge. Get it? Stonehenge, SpongeHenge. While the episode does work in the sense of giving us this feeling, I do think that it is lacking in two major departments: humor and story. The episode just didn't do a great job at balancing the usual dry humor of SpongeBob with this serious situation. There are a few jokes here and there, but they seem more just like moments trying to make you laugh within an otherwise bleak narrative. SB-129 was a similarly bleak episode with all the weird places Squidward goes to, but that episode did a great job of keeping up the humor and comedic tone within its more surreal narrative. While the story of SpongeHenge does revolve around SpongeBob dealing with the jellyfish problem, it doesn't really paint SpongeBob as someone with a character flaw that he needs to overcome. It gives him a problem to deal with, sure, but it doesn't give him anything internal that he has to solve in order to overcome that problem. This is even more of a missed opportunity when you consider the fact that one of SpongeBob's main character traits is optimism, and this episode literally depicts a slow apocalypse, which is something that should challenge your average optimist. If the episode more deeply engaged with SpongeBob's sunny optimism and included some sort of subplot where the people of Bikini Bottom are trying to find some kind of solution and need SpongeBob's help, but SpongeBob is too preoccupied with creating SpongeHenge to help them, then the moment at the end where SpongeBob realizes he's truly lost everything would have hit a lot harder. Chapter 5. The Inside Job. The Inside Job is a Plankton formula stealing episode where Karen invents a device where Plankton can steal people's memories and tries to use it to learn the formula from SpongeBob. While some of the science fiction and body horror concepts in this episode are interesting, like Plankton making SpongeBob blind and seeing through his eyes, and Plankton literally turning into SpongeBob because he connected to his heart, the episode doesn't really do much with these high concepts to tell a meaningful story. It's just a series of bits. a bit where SpongeBob makes a patty out of kitchen supplies, a bit where SpongeBob can't hear Krabs telling him the formula and Plankton's just about to hear when SpongeBob goes, "What?" The silly things in SpongeBob's brain filing cabinet. These are all good bits, sure, but where's the character arc? What does Plankton learn by invading SpongeBob's body? What does going inside of SpongeBob's body represent? After all, if someone could really do this to someone else, it would be considered a pretty big violation of privacy. But the episode doesn't really engage with that. It doesn't really engage with the idea of the self and our memories. This is an embodiment of a problem with how middle SpongeBob approached high concepts as opposed to classic SpongeBob. In classic SpongeBob, a science fiction episode would be story first, and the high concepts would only serve to enhance that story. SB-129 is about Squidward learning that he doesn't want the loneliness he thinks he craves, and uses time travel as a unique way of communicating that. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3 is about Manray learning the virtues of goodness and uses supervillain tropes as a unique way of communicating that. Algae is Always Greener is about Plankton learning to appreciate his own life and not covet the life of another, and uses a machine that literally switches his life with Krabs as a unique way of communicating that. Could you say the same about this episode? Can you say the same about SpongeHenge? They're nothing more than just episodes that have some cool things happen, but without having more coherent stories and arcs, they just ring hollow. Also, one last nitpick about Inside Job that always bugged me ever since I was a kid when this episode premiered. How come Plankton turns into SpongeBob when he connects to his heart, but he turns into Patrick when he connects to his head? Like, he already connected to SpongeBob's brain earlier and he didn't turn into him. So it clearly established the rule that you turn into the person if you connect to their heart. But then with Patrick, he connects to his brain. Like, maybe it's because since Patrick has such a bad brain, you turn into him if you try to connect to his non-brain, but I don't know, the whole ending just felt clunky. Chapter 6. Fun-Sized Friends. Fun-Sized Friends is an episode from season 11, so we're pretty much into modern SpongeBob at this point. The episode's science fiction element is the tiny SpongeBob and Patrick that are created by their larger counterparts when they remove a part of themselves that grows into a new tiny version. What I liked about this premise is how simple it is. They didn't need any sort of convoluted way of creating the tiny versions of themselves, they just made them. It's kind of educational too, because sponges and starfish do have regenerative properties. I don't know if they can clone themselves like this, but because of that real-life fact about their species, I am more inclined to immediately accept the premise of the episode. The reason SpongeBob and Patrick create these tiny versions of each other is so that they can always be together when they are apart, establishing a theme of codependence. However, I don't think the episode deeply engages enough with the theme of codependence, as SpongeBob and Patrick don't really come to any meaningful conclusion about their codependence come the end of the episode. There's this one moment in the middle where they can't hang out with each other because they're looking after the tiny version, but after that, the theme of codependence is not brought up again, and the episode more so focuses on the morality of keeping these tiny people around in a world that isn't built for them. So the two themes that the episode presents to us are great if they were presented on their own, but because the episode flip-flops between the two themes, it doesn't meaningfully engage with either of them. The episode would have been a lot better if it simply engaged with the idea of codependence and concluded with SpongeBob and Patrick giving up their tiny versions, which then go be friends with each other and learn to accept that you can't spend every waking moment with your friend. It's not necessarily a bad episode. I think it has a lot of great moments, and it definitely does have that science fiction feel, but it did have a couple of very glaring flaws. Chapter 7. Binary Bottom. Binary Bottom is an episode that revolves around an alternate universe where everyone in Bikini Bottom is a robot and it's all like robotic and stuff. I could tell from the fact that the first few minutes of this episode just show robot SpongeBob doing regular morning routine stuff, but as a robot, that this episode was going to completely lack any semblance of story. All this episode does is just show you the robot versions of all the characters, and human Karen, with a thin veneer of plot with robot Gary running off with robot Squidward stuck to its shell. What makes this such a missed opportunity is that there totally could have been a story to be told in this robot world. Why not engage with the idea of robotics? Robots are rigid, make exact decisions, and run on specific parameters. Why not have some of the story revolve around that? Lean into the extreme robotic nature of this world and identify how perhaps the SpongeBob robot that may be a little more inclined towards that's fun and outside the box thinking clashes with that world. Like, seriously, just a bunch of robots running around breaking stuff is all you got? Come on. It's insulting to the artists who worked on this episode that did a great job, by the way, that you just did so little with it. Binary Bottom also lacks perspective from the familiar world. Sure, there's that moment where Grandpa shows up for a second as basically like an ad for the Patrick Star Show, but other than that, there's no representative from the real world for us to see the world of Binary Bottom through the eyes of. Since no such familiar perspective exists to clash with the unfamiliar perspective, we don't have any relativity for the events that are going on. Even Bizarro Bottom, as much of a mess that episode was, at the very least understood this and had the episode revolve around the POV of SpongeBob. Binary Bottom is a strong embodiment of the major flaws of some modern SpongeBob episodes, and it's that they are all gimmick, no story. The writers think they can just go SpongeBob but robot and call it a day. This is double insulting in a science fiction episode because the point of science fiction is to use larger-than-life concepts to tell relatable stories. If you only have the larger-than-life concepts but have no life to them, then you're just left with a big nothing. Chapter 8. PL 1413. This brings us full circle to PL 1413, a sequel to SB 129. Sort of. The main similarity between these two episodes is the presence of the Chrome future and the fact that Plankton gets sent forward in time 2,000 years, just like how Squidward went forward that far in the original episode. Like most reference episodes, it superficially uses elements from its original without deeply engaging with the kinds of stories that made its original episode memorable in the first place, leading to it being forgettable. Plankton gets stuck in the future because he tried to steal a Krabby Patty out of a time capsule and got shut inside it. Already, can you feel how much weaker this is than Squidward's motivation in SB 129? Squid gets frozen because he was trying to get away from SpongeBob and Patrick and find some sense of solitude, which is directly tied to his character flaw of self-isolation. The very thing that he has to overcome in order to get home is the very thing that got him sent there in the first place. Sure, it's Plankton's obsession with stealing a Krabby Patty that gets him stuck in the future, but that character flaw on Plankton's part is not meaningfully addressed in the episode, nor does Plankton undergo any sort of character arc. Much of this episode's runtime is devoted to just showing Plankton, and by extension the audience, a few gags involving futuristic versions of the characters. And not only is it obvious that the episode is just filling time with meaningless noise, but the things he learns about the characters doesn't really mean anything to Plankton. Why would Plankton care that Squidward's music is appreciated in the future? Why does Plankton care what happened to SpongeBob or Patrick? It's clear that just the audience cares about this, but not the character. But if you're gonna show the audience something that they should care about, you should at least show it to them through the eyes of a character who cares about it too. It does try to force some connection to Sponge and Pat by having Plankton be tormented inside the time capsule by SpongeBob's laughter and Patrick's sticky discarded soda, but that's not really enough to have us invested in Plankton looking at what these characters are up to. To compare this episode to the future segment in SB 129, all of the things that were different about SpongeBob and Patrick in SB 129 were things that would personally bother Squidward, with SpongeBob having clones and Patrick having two heads. These things are more than just clever futuristic gags. They actually mean something to the overall story. SpongeBob being a cube on a wheel does not. The one actual character moment in the episode is when Plankton finds out that there's no reason for him to try and steal the Krabby Patty formula anymore, because in the future, everyone knows the formula anyway. And how does Plankton deal with this revelation that his sole motivation in life now doesn't matter, that his very purpose is completely null and void? He's like, oh, that sucks. I want to go home, I guess. Okay, just not gonna engage with that at all, huh? Plankton getting home is also just way too easy. He goes to Sandy, who's the Camp Coral Kid version. I'm just gonna move past that. And she's just like, hey, want to go back to the past? Oh, can do. And she also makes him forget the secret formula. Compare this to SB 129, where Squidward only gets home after he literally begs the time machine to take him there after completing his character arc. Can you not see in the comparison of these two things just how subpar one story is when compared to the other? And the craziest thing about it is that these are episodes that are connected. Like, did they not think that we would compare them? Then the episode ends with Plankton getting stuck in a time loop. An alright conclusion for a time travel narrative, but it would have been a lot better if the episode was trying to teach some sort of lesson, and Plankton's rejection of that lesson is what would have led him to getting stuck in the time loop. There was so much missed potential in this episode. Usually when I cover an episode that makes references to things like Nosferatu, the Imagination Box, Bubble Buddy, and the like, my conclusion is usually that the reference never should have been made, because they concluded perfectly in their original episodes and need no further revisiting. I don't feel the same way about the Chrome future of SB129. I think there's a ton of potential to revisit the future and tell really interesting stories, and Plankton was a great character to use for such a story, what with him already being an evil genius who has more of an association with all this science fiction stuff. All of the issues are in the execution. The episode would have been a lot better if it actually engaged with Plankton's obsession with the secret formula. If I were to rewrite the episode, I would have Plankton be anxious about stealing the formula because he's worried that someday people won't care about Krabby Patties anymore, and in this desperation, he attempts to take it from the time capsule, leading to him getting stuck in the future. Then, after finding out that in the future no one cares about the Krabby Patty formula, his earlier established fear coming true, he tries to find a new purpose with the future versions of SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick, which could lead to similar bits that were already present in the episode, but with added personal connection to Plankton's story. Then, once Plankton realizes that he can't seem to find any sort of purpose other than the formula, he begs Sandy to send him back to the past, similar to Squidward in SB129. And once back in the cast, Karen points out that he should be cured of his paranoia since he knows the Krabby Patty will still be popular until literally thousands of years away. But Plankton has a reverse character arc, where he refuses to overcome his paranoia, which leads to him getting stuck in the time loop, teaching the lesson not to be so preoccupied with the future. That's how you write a science fiction episode. Story first, concept second. Took me like 15 minutes to come up with that rewrite. If only I had a time machine so I could go back to the writer's room for this episode and give it to him. The quality of science fiction episodes in SpongeBob has declined significantly since the early days of the series. And I do think that science fiction episodes specifically have gotten worse, even relative to other kinds of episodes. Since science fiction concepts are so larger than life, a lazy writer may be able to find themselves getting away with just letting the concept takes over, leading to episodes like Binary Bottom, PL 1413, and also SpongeBob and Patrick's Timeline Twist-Up, which this video's main thesis also applies to that episode, but I already covered it in another video. Link in the description. SpongeBob is, at its core, a show about teaching us to find excitement in the mundane. The fact that this show about a guy working a minimum wage burger flipping job has so many exciting, high-concept science fiction episodes is just something to appreciate. But when the writers don't take advantage of the medium of science fiction to tell a meaningful story, the whole thing just falls flat on its face. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you like what I'm doing here, please consider supporting my Patreon or becoming a channel member. Also, check out my gaming channel, where I just put out a video about Battle for Bikini Bottom GBA. Man, that game